Gather round, young ones, gather round. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about one of the greatest generals who ever lived. His name? Hannibal Barca. You've heard of him, right? No? Well, let me fill you in, because this man gave the Romans, the most powerful empire of the time, one of the biggest beatings in history. I'm talking about the Battle of Cannae. And trust me, this was no ordinary battle. Oh no, it was a lesson in how brains can beat brawn. Now, Hannibal wasn't just any old general. He was a Carthaginian, from the great city of Carthage, you know, the one in North Africa, what we call Tunisia these days. His father, Hamilcar, was also a general, and when Hannibal was just a boy, legend says his father made him swear an oath to never be friends with Rome. Why? Well, because the Romans had already given Carthage a bloody nose in the First Punic War, and taken a bunch of their territory, including that lovely island called Sicily. That didn't sit well with Hannibal's family, let me tell you. Now Hannibal, he grew up with one thing on his mind. He wanted to teach Rome a lesson they'd never forget. And boy, did he ever. But we'll get to that. First, let's talk about why this Battle of Cannae even happened. So here's what happened. Hannibal wasn't the type to sit around and wait for things to happen. Oh no, he was a man of action, as they say. And so in 218 BCE, he did something no one thought was possible. He marched his army, including war elephants, yes, elephants, all the way from Spain over the Alps into Italy. Imagine that, elephants crossing the snowy mountains. Ha! You can bet the Romans didn't see that coming. Now, Hannibal started winning battles left and right, embarrassing the Romans at places like Trebia and Lake Trasimene. Rome was getting real nervous. They thought they could just send more soldiers, do the bigger is better thing. But Hannibal had a different idea. He knew Rome's real strength wasn't just in its legions, it was in its pride. So what did he do? He lured them into a trap at Cannae in 216 BCE. Now let me paint the picture for you. Rome had put together their biggest army yet. We're talking around 80,000 soldiers. Imagine that. They had one goal, crush Hannibal once and for all. But old Hannibal? He was sitting there with about 50,000 men, thinking, bigger doesn't mean smarter. So he came up with a plan, and this plan was genius. If there had been any books about warfare back then, Hannibal would have written them. He lined up his troops in a sort of crescent shape, like a bow, if you will. He put his weaker troops in the middle and his best fighters, including his African infantry, on the sides. His secret weapon? Cavalry, led by his friend Maharbal. These guys were like the ninjas of the ancient world on horseback, fast, sneaky, and deadly. And here's where it gets good. Hannibal's cavalry, led by Maharbal, crushed the Roman cavalry on the flanks. With the enemy cavalry out of the picture, those horsemen swung around behind the Roman infantry. So now you've got the Romans pushing into Hannibal's center, while being surrounded on all sides, front, back, left, right. It was a classic double envelopment, and let me tell you, it's still considered one of the greatest battlefield maneuvers in history. Suddenly, the Romans found themselves trapped. They couldn't move forward, couldn't retreat, and they were packed in so tight that many couldn't even raise their arms to swing a sword. It was chaos. The Carthaginians closed in from all sides, and by the end of the day, over 50,000 Romans lay dead. That's more than most cities back then had in total population. The Romans got absolutely wiped out. Now, you'd think after a victory like that, Hannibal would march right on to Rome and finish the job, right? Well, here's the funny thing. He didn't. He just hung around in southern Italy. Good question. His friend Maharbal even told him, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you don't know how to use it." It's a famous line. But Hannibal, he was a cautious man. He knew he didn't have enough siege equipment or reinforcements to take the heavily fortified city of Rome, so he waited. Some say it was his biggest mistake. Rome, after all, wasn't just a city, it was an idea, and that idea wouldn't die so easily. So why did Hannibal fight at Cannae? Simple. He wanted to break Rome's will. He thought if he could land a punch hard enough, the Romans would give up and sue for peace. But here's the thing about Romans. They didn't know when to quit. Even after losing most of their army, they kept fighting. They rebuilt, they reorganized, and eventually they wore Hannibal down. It took years, but Rome finally won the war. Still, Hannibal's victory at Cannae became the stuff of legend. Now Now, young ones, here's the lesson. Hannibal was one of the greatest military minds the world has ever seen. He didn't just rely on strength, he used his head. He knew how to outthink his enemies, and that's what made him dangerous. Even though Carthage eventually lost the war, Hannibal's tactics were studied by generals for centuries. If you've ever heard of great commanders like Napoleon or Frederick the Great, well, guess who they looked up to? Yep, Hannibal Barca. So, what's the moral of the story? It's not always about having the biggest army or the strongest soldiers. Sometimes, it's about being the smartest person on the battlefield. Hannibal taught us that. And remember, history is full of surprises. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, someone like Hannibal comes along and changes the game. That's why we study history, to learn from the past, so we're ready for the future. Alright, that's enough storytelling for today. Now go on. Tell your friends about the time Hannibal gave Rome the fight of their lives. And remember, next time someone says, bigger is better, tell them about Cannae.
And that, my friends, is just one of the many incredible stories from history. If you enjoyed learning about Hannibal Barca and the epic Battle of Cannae, there are plenty more fascinating tales to come. Don't miss out on the next adventure. Make sure to follow or subscribe for more captivating stories, legendary battles, and heroic figures. Join me as we explore the moments that shaped our world, and together, we'll keep history alive.